This fall on PBS, director Ken Burns changes parks.
There's a drive to deep right center. This may be gone. Home run. The Red Sox win.
Don't miss the all-new 10th inning of baseball, coming this fall only on PBS.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Not Content Podcast. My name is Jerome Cuson. Here tonight, we are going to finish our conversation about Ken Burns' baseball, as we will be around the 15th anniversary of when this came out. We will be discussing the 10th inning, the 4-hour addendum to the 9 innings that aired in 1994. Lots to discuss there. Of course, you can follow us on YouTube. Please leave a 4 or 5-star review on Spotify to get those algorithms going. If you are watching us on YouTube, then please like and subscribe. Click the bell icon for notifications. And as always, Brian, we are going to be continuing our conversation on movies and TV. We have done a recent run of baseball, and we have very exciting plans for the summer. May, we're looking forward to a little bit of Robin Hood, I know. June, we'll be celebrating the year 1985, and I'm sure we'll have a whole lot else going on as well. But here tonight, Brian, we are going to be discussing the 10th inning of baseball, a documentary follow-up that I was very much looking forward to, which I think it's fine, but I couldn't help but be disappointed. And I think part of that disappointment comes, when this comes out in 2010, we are kind of at the beginning of the glut of sports documentaries, especially ones focusing on baseball. MLB Network is starting to put them out around this time. You're also seeing the 30 for 30 series. So you're really getting a lot of great coverage about specific events like the Fernando Valenzuela, what he was able to do. The Boston Red Sox 2004 team, of course, has been covered to death. You have everything surrounding the steroid stuff as well. And plus, just the fact that we are cognizant and aware of what's going on, I think that ultimately is gonna hurt our enjoyment, because there really isn't the sense of wonder that comes with this addendum like there is with what we saw in 1994. I also think that, because of the strike and because of some of the very negative things that have gone on in the 16 ensuing years, I think that some of the magic has been lost as well. I don't know about you, but that's what came across to me in watching this again.
Maybe it's just because it's modern, Jerome, and it's kind of like our nostalgia. It's not like our grandfather's nostalgia anymore, right? Because that's kind of like the heart and soul of that original 9-part documentaries, the old school baseball stuff. So once you get to the modern era, it's more of the modern attitudes, right? So there's like the modern cynicism, the emphasis on players and journalists kind of clashing and having that clash going. That dates back all the way to the beginning of baseball. But this kind of shows you that like the journalists in this case in the MLB were really like ahead of the steroid thing, and no one was picking up on it except other journalists at the time until the federal government forced Major League Baseball to actually do something about it. So I thought that was interesting, but it's not nothing we don't know, because I think in this age of 94 to 2010, that's just me and Jerome's wheelhouse. That's our era of growing up on baseball. So that's why it's so familiar to us and not necessarily groundbreaking or shocking or revelations. Like I would say the revelation that I got from the last documentary was when the players sued or whatever in that antitrust lawsuit in 1988 or whatever about, not signing free agents. That was a shocker to me. Nothing in this was kind of shocking in this documentary. Everything was just kind of like, it was like, oh my God, I remember when that happened on SportsCenter, or they broke the news on SportsCenter that day, or when Mark McGwire went on the federal commission or whatever and just made himself look like a fucking idiot, claiming the Fifth Amendment, and it just made him look worse. And it's just like, dude, you're already in that situation. You might as well just reveal everything. It's not incriminating. It wasn't a criminal court case. It was just a federal hearing. But these players just did not want to admit to it, so that's a bad look on them, and that really taints that legacy, or that, their legacies in this era. But it's the stuff where we kind of already knew, you know what I'm saying? So it's all about the steroid era. Barry Bonds, I guess, whether you like him or not, he seems to be the Anakin Skywalker of baseball history. And, it's just, I don't think everyone's going to.
So in this case, Brian, who has the higher ground? If he's Anakin, who has the higher ground?
I assume Hank Aaron because he's the only one with a legit record. Maybe no Judge. Judge might. I don't know. He can claim.
I don't know.
close,
I mean, I'm very.
but it's got to keep
skeptical
up
of this
50 or
idea.
more a year. So
I'm very skeptical of this idea of like what is a legitimate record and what isn't at this point. I think it's just kind of been bastardized, and I don't necessarily think that it's certainly not Henry Aaron's fault. I think that he is somebody who is worth respecting, even if he doesn't have the record. I think his level of consistency as a ball player stands above almost anyone else, and certainly should never be forgotten. His contributions to the sport and what he did for the sport. But when I think about this entire era, of course, this is when I'm becoming a baseball fan and maturing and becoming a White Sox fan, which certainly has its own perils. And that team, the 2005 team, does not get any coverage really in this documentary, and that's a little concerning to me, just because that 2005 World Series has been ignored, and it's very disrespectful to me. Of course, I'm biased, but I mean, you look at what that team did. You look at the fact that in the American League Championship Series, there were 4 complete games, and you will never ever see that again. You will never see 4 consecutive complete games in a postseason series again, and it happened in 20 years ago. That will be the last time. This is the 20th anniversary, and it's I understand covering the Boston Red Sox. I mean, what they did in 2004. Nobody had ever come back from that situation of being down 0-3 in the history of baseball, and the fact that they did it is really special. And they certainly deserve a lot of coverage at this point. I think it's almost been overblown, just because I think that team gets so much airtime. Multiple documentaries have been made about that team at this point. But you also think about like the 2001, what happens after 9/11. And I mean, look, again, that is a really important thing. But again, we come back to this idea of them being very New York and Boston centric, and you do get some additional play with San Francisco. But I think that part of the issue, the funny thing that happens is that they talk about San Francisco and kind of how they haven't won a World Series in forever, and then they win like 3 World Series in the span of 6 years. Like they basically did a deal where they won a World Series like every other year 3 times, and kind of nullifies some of the hard feelings that I'm sure that this documentary presents. And you don't really get a lot about Steve Bartman either. And it's like, to me, the Cubs curse absolutely should have been covered more in depth. And I know that you're kind of going a little into the past, but I think it was worth covering in this format, because again, the Cubs curse wasn't really discussed in the original 9 innings, and it certainly should have been discussed here.
I think Bartman was still a recluse at this point because, as you know the story, he kind of had to hide away from society.
Brian, I was working at the ballpark that night, so.
Oh my god! Oh my god! Did he need an escort, like a police escort?
I wasn't close enough to know, but I know he was.
Yeah, I think I remember police escort.
He was in the detention cell.
Oh my god! I
had
feel
to put
so
him there
bad because, like, if you know the story of Bartman, and everyone, well, not everyone, but a lot of Chicago fans have kind of forgiven him since they won the World Series in 2016. But he was a diehard Cubs fan, and I think that they kind of missed that part in the Ken Burns documentary, because he was a diehard Cubs fan. And if you look at the video, he's listening to the live broadcast of the game because he doesn't miss any of the strike calls or any of that kind of thing. He's that committed. He's one of those people that listens to the game while they're at the ballpark. And I was just thinking, like, man, this guy got such a raw deal. Because I'm not even sure Moises Alou catches that ball, to be honest. Because it looks like it's going to land in the glove, but if Bartman's jumping up from where he's standing, it's obviously more leaning towards the foul area. I don't know.
I don't think it's. I never believed it's been fan interference. I think Alou just goes enough into the crowd. The problem is that ballpark. That is the only ballpark where something like that happens. It really doesn't happen anywhere. That doesn't happen now because of the netting. So that's the irony of all this, is that literally that situation can never happen again because of the Nets.
Yeah, so it just sucks, man, because that guy was a diehard fan and he had to go into hiding. You know what I'm saying? And I think it's a really important aspect of that story because it's like this idea of this innocent fan going into hiding from the public in his hometown is like a story. That's a real like story. You know what I'm saying? But they just
It
didn't
is.
get to the heart of that.
There's a 30 for 30
But then
called
the
Texas
30 for
Talent.
30s come along and fill in these gaps. So I think what happens is I think this is if you want to get an idea of what the 30 for 30s are going to give you, and then from the last 10 years or so, this is kind of a preview for that because it feels like they set you up for all these individual stories, and then like the 30 for 30s kind of close them out a little bit because it feels like you're gonna because I mean they made 30 for 30s on the home run chase, Mark McGwire and the steroids, the '94 closure of the season, all those different events. All the really important events of the last 20 years have been covered in 30 for 30. So this is kind of like a generalization of it all, hence skipping the 2005 World Series, which I think is really
Yeah,
like,
they certainly do a better
really
job
crucial.
of covering the Latino players. I think that was one of the big criticisms of the first 9 innings is not doing that. So I think that is certainly something that gets rectified. I think it's also simplified. I think because I'm not sure that they're covering kind of the negatives of it. Because essentially, I mean, the way that I see it is that Latino labor was used to replace black labor, and they did it because it was cheaper. And I think that's something that really doesn't get talked about, but it's something that I think has been a real issue for baseball. And I think that they have not only lost a lot of potential players because you don't have as many black players as you used to. I don't know. I think the percentage has actually gone up. I think they put in some effort to get black players into the league. But I mean, the percentage has just gone down exponentially over the last 20, 30 years. And if you're a black athlete, you're playing basketball or you're playing football. You're not really playing baseball as much. And I think it's definitely hurt the game. And again, I think the baseball, well, it's certainly not, it's not in danger of dying next year. I think they're really having issues in terms of getting young fans and getting people into the ballpark. And they've also tried different things to kind of mitigate that. But the reality is that 25 to 30% of these teams are non-competitive every year, and it's really hard to sustain a fan base. I mean, you basically burned the city of Oakland at this point. You've burned the city of Tampa. You have two teams. Those two teams are playing in minor league cities, and again, this isn't something that I expect to be covered in Ken Burns' baseball, but it just feels like the sport itself becomes more irrelevant. And I think you start to see a lot of those seeds planted with the things that are happening in this documentary. It's the strike in 1994. It's the steroid scandals of the early aughts. It's the huge financial peril that we are all in 07, 08. And then, a lot of curses and a lot of long-term kind of storylines. And, the Red Sox finally win their World Series in 04, the White Sox in 05. The Giants have their little run in 2010, in the 2010s, and then the Cubs finally get their World Series in 2016. And I'm a firm believer that in many ways, like the 2016 Cubs, like them winning the World Series in a lot of ways is like the ending of the history of baseball, if that makes sense. Because like what else is there in terms of like these long-term like storylines and pain and all that good stuff?
So you're saying that the Red Sox in '04 was Infinity War, and Chicago winning the World Series in 2016 was that game? I mean,
I mean, it kind of feels like
I
it
mean, I
feels
make
like
that
that.
comparison a lot, but I mean, it's true because sometimes like you have those like unbelievable down moments, and then it's like you got to rise above the ashes and do your third act and win the championship at the end. We saw it with the Dodgers, we saw it with Chicago, the Red Sox. I guess you could say for the Yankees when they had their downslide in the 80s and 90s, or the early half of the 90s, and then they had their comeback. But I don't know. I just feel like this is fun to watch if you're like our age, but if you're like in your like 60s and 70s, this might like enrage you and just be like, this reminds me of all the things I hate about modern baseball and all that kind of thing. I can easily see that because like, man, I mean, I wasn't like consciously aware of the MLB season in '94. I was more obviously consciously aware of the Undertaker versus Undertaker at the time. But just I mean, if I was a diehard Dodger fan back then, I think I would have lost a lot of faith in just baseball in general. Luckily, my heart wasn't in it then, but I could see how just like a team like Montreal just loses everything because of one season going away, and then the team not becoming the team they were when they were on top, and then when the season comes back in '95, they're just not the same. So it's really like a really tragic thing because like I don't know, maybe Tony Gwynn would have hit 400 in that season. Maybe we would have had someone hit like 58 home runs in that season. That guy from San Francisco, not Barry Bonds. It was another guy who was on
Yeah,
pace to break the record.
Matt Williams was
Yeah.
potentially chasing. I mean, the White Sox were the best team in the American League at the time the strike was going on, and Frank Thomas was going to win his second MVP, and who knows what would have happened in 1994 in the American League playoffs if the White Sox and Cleveland had gotten in, or the Yankees. Like you're potentially a White Sox Expos World Series. I think that changes kind of the trajectory of baseball, and it changes the trajectory of both of those teams, I think, as well.
Yeah, it's a big what if, but I think that was a big part of the early part of this part of the documentary, and it was really important because I mean, obviously they didn't cover it in the original because when this aired, or the original aired, that's when the strike hit, which is that big irony I talked about when we talked about it last year. So it's really unfortunate, but baseball did bounce back, obviously, with the home run chase and everything. I remember that. What I realized watching this documentary is I watched a lot of these moments live on TV, and I'm just thinking like, man, I remember watching that live. I remember watching that live, and just that whole thing, like seeing Mark McGwire break the record and go into the crowd and embrace the Maris or the Roger Maris family. I just think that was like a cool moment. But then looking back now, it's like it feels so tainted because of what he said. Man, I just wish that he was just honest about it. It feels Bonds is more honest about it, even though he just kind of answers things in circles, like. Did they test you yesterday or would they test you now? Baseball can test me anytime. It's like he's going around, the actual answer of him doing steroids and just comes up with any other answer to kind of question the journalist asking him the question. So it's this kind of conflict that Bonds always had with the media that I think that at least this documentary got well, because I do feel like he was always conflicted with the media in terms of answering these questions.
I mean, I think the biggest issue is McGwire hasn't really addressed his part in it, and like the funny thing is that he's been a coach in professional baseball, and it's a very unusual situation. Sammy Sosa, things did not end well with the Cubs at all, and he just came back into the fold this year. I believe they're going to be doing. I don't know if they're doing like a number retirement ceremony, but like he was at the convention this year. Like he's actively, like he did a non-apology apology basically to kind of ingratiate himself back into the Cubs. And it had less to do with steroids and more the way that things ended with him in 2004. There's a pretty famous story of Sammy Sosa not coming to the ballpark on the last day of the season in '04 when the Cubs were eliminated, and Kerry Wood taking a baseball bat and destroying his stereo. Have you ever heard this before?
No, but I do know it was a tumultuous time because where did Sammy go next? Cincinnati or something? I forget.
He went to Baltimore because I saw him.
Okay.
Because the next year I went to a Sox game and Sammy Sosa was on the Orioles.
And that sucks, man, because I thought that Cubs team at least had a chance the next year, but they just didn't hold it together.
That '04 team is one of the biggest disappointments. That's the year. That was the big
because they still had the pitching. You know what I'm saying? But the pitching wore out is the problem because the
problem is that all of them were on drugs, and then they started steroid testing, and they started getting hurt and were not good anymore. If you look at there was a list that came out on John Heyman's Twitter recently, and this is a list that has been kind of in the ether, so to speak, of players who failed their drug tests in 2003, allegedly. I want to say the word allegedly one more time. And if you look at that list, all four of the Cubs starting pitchers were on the list. Kerry Wood, Mark Pryor, Carlos Zambrano, and Matt Clement were all on the list. That's pretty funny.
I mean, they were throwing gas, and that's the year, or I don't forget what year that I think Mark Pryor threw 20 Ks, Kerry Wood threw 20, something like that.
No, it was Kerry Wood. It was Kerry Wood, 1998. I mean, that was a really big deal because that was his rookie year, and then, he's one of those guys that was always hurt. Mark Pryor, also a guy always hurt. Funny enough, I still can't believe that Mark Pryor is a pitching coach in pro baseball. Not just the pitching coach, by the way, but the pitching coach for the defending world champion Los Angeles Dodgers.
Yeah, and just be ready because I think that guy has the perfect look for a coach. He just looks like a natural coach. The way he's got that grizzled gray beard,
It's
and
really
the way
hilarious to me that
he
he
looks
has, like,
good
this
as a coach,
stage
dude. So don't be surprised if he takes over like a team in like 2-3 years. I've been serious about that. I said this a couple years ago. Um, just don't be
pitching
surprised.
coaches don't really become manager. Like, it doesn't. It's
But I think
sometimes
he's got
happens, but
so much experience with Dave Roberts after all these years. It's like it's got to rub off. You know what I'm saying? And he's. I mean, for what he had to do last year with like 3 pitchers going into the playoffs, starting pitchers for the Dodgers, and work this whole like system of like getting the bullpen ready for anything. It was just crazy, and then the Dodgers still were able to pull it off. So, and it's not like they had 3 aces; they had like 1 ace and 2 good pitchers, and they still.
they were beset by injuries, and it feels like that is carried over to this year. But I think in terms of like the steroid stuff, I mean, it sucks, but like I can't help but think it's sour grapes because of all the money these owners made off of them, and the idea that you're not going to put these guys into the Hall of Fame when careers were made. The owners made a shit ton of money, and now you're going to be like, no, actually, it's illegal, and we're not going to put Barry Bonds in the Hall of Fame. It's insanity to me. I personally don't like Barry Bonds or Roger Clemens, but I think the idea of them not being in the Hall of Fame is stupid. I think it's really, really stupid. And I think that you're doing a disservice to the Hall of Fame when you don't put these guys in, because at the end of the day, to me, the Baseball Hall of Fame is a museum. And this is not the same as Rob Manfred calling the World Series trophy a hunk of tin. This isn't. It is a museum that should honor an accurate history of baseball. It should not be an adjudicator of morality ultimately. And I think these guys should be in. I think Joe Jackson should be in. I think Pete Rose should be in. And I think the only thing that you could do is put on their plaques what they did and why it took them so long to get in. But I think the idea of not putting them into the Hall of Fame is absurd. And I think it's really hurt the quality of the Hall of Fame ceremony as well, because you're not getting these A plus players in there. There's just a girth. There's been a dearth of them the last few years, and it's really unfortunate.
Well, I think a lot of these Hall of Fames have kind of learned from the WWE, unfortunately, where let's not honor a guy when he's around when he can say something on live television that we don't want them to say. You know what I'm saying? We can honor them when they're not around anymore.
I thought you were going to say I thought you were going to say they're copying WWE by putting in people that don't deserve to get in.
Oh, okay. No, I'm saying I think
the Basketball Hall of Fame is incredibly guilty of that. I mean, just the fact that Michael Cooper and Billy Donovan can get in the NBA or the best. Yeah, it's the basketball, not the NBA. The Basketball Hall of Fame. It's utterly insane to me.
Yeah, well, I'm thinking is like I think MLB's just scared. Like, imagine, okay, Jose Canseco, he's probably not really a Hall of Famer, right? But let's just say he was going into the Hall of Fame. Imagine his speech and what he would say. You know what I'm saying? I don't think the MLB wants that kind of media.
I mean, maybe. I don't know. I'm very skeptical of,
because I can only imagine if Pete Rose was alive and they let him in, what the fuck he would say on live television.
I don't know that it would be as bad as you're thinking. I really don't.
Because I mean, I don't know. I think retiring changes you. You get bitter. You have all these grudges as an old man. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't know. I just feel like that's what they're scared of. And I mean, look, let's say like Jim Cornette was on a leash, right? When he had to introduce the Rock and Roll Express in the Hall of Fame. Right. I guess you need a leash on these guys. That's what I'm thinking. Because I know that like if Barry Bonds,
I think these guys are smart enough to know. I think these guys are smart enough to know what's appropriate and what's inappropriate. I mean, Jim Cornette's not going to bury the WWE.
Yeah, wrestlers maybe, but like, look at Barry Bonds and all the quotes that he gave the media in this documentary, right? I can't imagine the things he would say about the media in the speech. So I'm worried about that.
I think they vet these speeches probably more than you think.
We'll see, because I think that's the issue. I mean, if I'm if I'm the commissioner of the MLB, that's the big worry that I have, is these guys going off script and just saying whatever they want and trying to tarnish. Like, you tarnish my legacy. Here's what I really think about things. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's my worry.
Like I
That's
said, I'm very skeptical of that.
But who knows?
Who knows, man? Like,
I mean, otherwise, I say let them in. You know, it's fine.
like,
Let them in.
I don't know what the right answer is. Like, that's the thing. Is that at the end of the day, I don't know that putting them in is great, but I don't think leaving them out is great either. We're just it's a terrible situation for everybody involved, and that's the bottom line.
Yeah, and I think maybe, I don't know, I would say a fan vote, but that makes things worse because we know it's far worse than the NBA All-Star game now. That's not going to work. It's tough, man. I mean, everything is kind of relied on the sports writers. So
I don't know what the solution is at this point. I don't know that the sports writers are necessarily the best judges either. I don't know. I just think we need to rip the Band-Aid off at some point and just put these guys in. Like, if you want to do it in 1 year, just be like, you know what? Just put them in. Let's get this over with. Let's put in Jackson, Rose, Clemens, Bonds. Let's just do it. I mean, I think it's absurd that these guys are not in the Hall of Fame. And if you want to point to morality, I'm just gonna tell you, like, Ty Cobb is in the Hall of Fame, and Ty Cobb is one of the most racist, terrible human beings. And should he be in the Hall of Fame? Yes, because again, I don't think that a museum should necessarily be adjudicating morality. As long as you portray what they did accurately, your museum can do whatever it wants. But to not put these guys in the Hall of Fame, I think is just absurd. And that's what I come away thinking about this documentary. Anything else that you remember? The 9/11 stuff is always like,
yeah, that was crazy. I remember that. And then I never really watched those games live, but I saw a lot of the clips between Arizona and New York, and I think that's probably one of the stronger 7-game World Series of all time. It's probably up there with, like, that Cincinnati Red Sox won, Cubs and Cleveland. It's up there for sure. It was just weird to me that they left out the Rockies making the World Series and how big of a deal that actually was, because God help me, that might be the only time that the Rockies make the World Series. And I mean, they didn't really mention the wild card at all, like the extension of the playoffs. I thought that was going to be a big deal.
Not mentioning the extension of the playoffs was weird, and I don't know. It's like,
and that's a big deal. It's a big deal
because they didn't cover, like obviously the playoffs expanded in 1969. Is that why they didn't? I don't know. I agree. It's unusual to me that they did not, because the wild card was definitely controversial, and I am of the opinion that adding another wild card is not great either. Has not been great for the sport, and then doing the 12-team thing now is not great. I think it just creates too much randomization. But that's a whole other conversation that I don't want to have right now. I'll just say that the wild card is certainly it would have been something that they should have discussed.
For sure. And then wasn't Ichiro with the Yankees when they won that World Series in 2009?
He was not.
When did he join the Yankees? 2011?
Let me look that up. So,
because I thought that would have been the perfect bow on that Ichiro story, but then I realized maybe he wasn't on that team. But yeah, that was the last big Yankees World Series win. Definitely didn't watch that World Series, folks.
Ichiro was on the Yankees from 2012 through 2014.
Okay, so he didn't make that team, but yeah, that was the last big run of the Yankees. I think that was when everyone was still together, and Derek Jeter and Posada and all them, that crew. But I got to give them their due. They won the World Series fair and square. Nothing controversial about it, so I give them their due. But I don't like the Yankees, and we got our revenge sort of on them from the last couple World Series that the Dodgers faced them. So I'm cool with that. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of how they have to end it, because this documentary comes out in 2010. I was kind of surprised too they didn't mention the stoppage in the World Series in was it 2008? Like they literally stopped it in the middle of the game because of rain or something, and had to continue that same game like a couple days later.
Yeah,
was the deciding game, I think.
Well,
yeah, that was weird.
I really do wonder if if there's gonna be another inning. I think you really do have to cover the Cubs. Like I just think like that's the logical endpoint for this
See, I think
series.
you should just do a whole documentary on the Cubs. I think that solves a lot of stuff.
I mean, if Ken Burns did that, I certainly would not disagree with it because again, I think the Cubs have been very poorly covered in the baseball series. Like if you just wanted to do like a history of Chicago baseball and cover both the Cubs and the Sox in 2 hours, I think you could probably do some really good stuff. Because again, you're really like you would be repeating some of the Black Sox stuff, but really like there's a lot of losing that you could just ignore. I mean, you could certainly cover for the White Sox, you could cover 59. For the Cubs, you could cover 69, 84, 89 for the White Sox. You know, you got 93, 94, 2000, and then of course 05. Certainly, yeah, it's something that they should definitely consider. But Ken Burns is a very busy individual, and he's certainly not getting any younger. And you have to imagine that at some point he wants to, maybe step away at some point. And obviously he's got a crew now. He's co-directing a lot of his documentaries. And this one, I believe it was Lynn Novak was the other person. So yeah, there's a lot, and certainly, if you are interested in more Ken Burns, there is a ton out there. Dust Bowl, Prohibition, Vietnam War, Muhammad Ali, Jack Johnson, a lot of very worthwhile material out there.
For sure. And I guess the one criticism I think I have is that, I think a lack of Billy Crystal was kind of evident. I think I don't know why he wasn't in this. He surely was available, but I just feel like he was, I don't know. I was waiting for him to talk during the Yankees dynasty run era or that part of the doc, and he just wasn't showing up. And I was like, well, that's disappointing. I was expecting like this big Billy Crystal, like, I would go with my father to the games. I go with my son to the games or something like that. Something kind of poetic, but it didn't come. So I was disappointed because he's always at the games in the 90s anyway. So that was very weird. But yeah, just a little footnote there. But I also think that the voiceover, Keith David, or is it David Keith? I forget.
It's Keith David.
Keith David. He did a great job. I was just kind of like taken aback because I was like, oh, this feels like they're doing just the Jackie Robinson thing, or Jackie Robinson kind of just used this tone and kind of,
Has done has narrated some of the other ones as well.
Yeah, I just don't remember him in the original run, but I guess the original run was more focused on narrative from like letters and stuff from the past. So, but other than that, it was really cool to see that that Boston fan. I forget her name, but she was in the original documentary talking about
Doris Kearns Goodwin.
Yes, and then the big Boston fan, and then talking about in the original documentary talking about Game 7 and 6 with Cincinnati, and then living the moment in 2004, every single moment like I did. That was incredible. They kind of missed the part where like there was like an off day, or not an off day, but a rain out during that series between Boston and New York in 04 that I think really helped the Red Sox in terms of resting their pitchers and killing the momentum of the Yankees. Because if you look at that, the Yankees didn't really score that many runs after that point. They scored like maybe 4 or 5 each game, but Boston was just like
that's when cold and they didn't have the pitching. That was the problem. Fun fact: but two of the Red Sox fans, Mark Barnacle and Doris Kearns Goodwin, both accused of plagiarism at some point in their writing careers. So that's fun.
Hey, at least you told the good story in the documentary. That's all that matters for me at this moment. But that's a whole other issue. But it was really cool to see her come back and kind of like, continue the Red Sox story and close it out. And I don't know if you remember this, Jerome. Do you remember that Nike commercial that played after the Red Sox won the World Series, and it just showed like the same seat at Fenway and each generation of a family sitting in the same seat?
That is a very good commercial, and it feels like that's one of the last good sports commercials that was made, because I don't feel like we get good ones we don't get good ones.
Yeah, I thought that was a really cool thing, and then Nike kind of did something similar last year with the Dodgers one and did the whole end credits Hollywood style with "I Love LA," and I just started crying. But that was really cool. But I think that Nike one in 04 was like so touching and so perfect for that moment. But that was a really cool time in history.
It was. So that's really all I have to say about the 2010 baseball. I think it's good. I don't think it's great. I am very much looking forward to next week, though, and I know Brian is as well. Brian's going to be getting the Kleenex out to get very emotional. What are we doing next week?
We're talking about the man, Fernando Valenzuela. He was kind of like MIA in the Ken Burns documentary during the 80s portion, which was shocking. So we're going to give him the full treatment, 30 for 30. I think it came out in 2014, 2013. Fernando Mania is the title, but they really got the story down. And I don't know. I was taken aback when I forget who made the statement, but in the 10th inning doc, they said that Sammy Sosa was bigger than Fernando Valenzuela in his heyday, and I was taken aback. But I just had to compose myself and think, okay, I guess it's two different countries. But in terms of Fernando Mania, I don't know, man. That felt like a bigger deal. But Sammy Sosa got the prime time slot on TV all the time when he was doing the home run chase, which is why he became a household name. So it's very, we can discuss that next week. But I feel like Fernando has a longer lasting legacy now when he worked with the Dodgers in terms of like being the sports or being a commentator for all those years for Dodgers TV on the Spanish stations. So there's a big history with Fernando. So we'll talk about him next week and how much he influenced the game, bringing Mexicans to the ballpark in LA, which is a huge deal and kind of transformed the look of the Dodger crowd over the 80s and the 90s, and now it's become a predominantly Latino crowd, but it didn't always start that way in Dodger Stadium in the 60s, obviously, so that's a big change.
Yeah, it's pretty shitty history.
Well, we can talk about the history of Dodger Stadium as well, I guess, if you want to talk about that really. I don't know if that's in the doc, but a lot of people had to get kicked out.
I believe that it is, and we'll get to that next week.
For sure.
All right, for Brian, I'm Jerome. Thank you so much for listening. We'll talk to you again next week.